We started up the Clark Fork River Grass Valley Important Bird Area a number of years ago. First because we knew that it was an important area for birds, but we needed to document that and be able to prove it and tell our story. And telling the story is so fundamental and important to accomplishing conservation that we knew that this is what we had to do. And we had to talk to the right people. So we began with bird surveys. Because 80% or so of the area in the IBA was privately owned, we talked to private landowners and involved them in the bird surveys at the time. We followed up with some general newspaper feature stories that helped tell the story of the importance of birds in this area, communicate with the public at large. But the people that really we needed to talk with were the landowners and the city-county planners. These are the people that really make decisions about what happens on the landscape. So we began talking with the county planners, explaining to them why this area was important to birds and what about it made it important. It was something they really didn't understand or appreciate. It was very important that we stick to our guns and tell what we knew about the birds and the science behind the birds and their habitat. So after we started to tell the story, we knew we wanted to create an important bird area, and we did. Then you need a brochure, something you can hand out to people that's attractive with some pictures and tells the simple story of what an IBA is all about and why it's important. We partnered with another group who were capable of accomplishing conservation. That's the local land trust, in this case, Five Valleys Land Trust. So our role as an Audubon chapter was to talk with landowners and facilitate conservation easements. And in some cases, the landowners weren't too interested in that, but by talking about birds and their land and the importance of the habitat, we learned that some of these landowners were interested in easements. We did the bird surveys and in the process established some relationships. One interesting story was a landowner that basically was somewhat of a recluse, hard to reach, but he listened to you and you could see a twinkle in his eye when you talked about birds. He didn't really say much about the direction of his land. We just kept in touch with him for over the years. He was in a retirement home and developed terminal cancer. Shortly before he died, he donated a conservation easement on his entire 360 acres of land, which included valuable wetlands and water and marsh, the whole gamut of wetland. By partnering with a land trust, the other thing that was helpful is doing bird surveys on potential properties that able to get an easement on. And what the bird surveys do was document what's there, and it helps these land trusts compete in the granting process for funds to help purchase parts of that conservation easement. One interesting case was a lady that owned about 600 and some acres, loved having bird knowledge about her place, but wasn't really ready to take out a conservation easement. But a year or two later, after I stopped by to visit with her, I learned that she had built a scrapbook of all the birds we've identified in her place, including the pictures. And she held a picnic for all the local landowners to talk about conservation. So it was very important in her mind, but the final step of putting an easement on her land still remains to be done. One thing we've done in protecting the lands that are there is go to bat when subdivisions are proposed. There we have to write letters to the county commissioners, to the land planners, and appear at hearings, which we've done a number of times. One of the very first ones we got involved with was a large property along the Clark Fork River that had proposed a large gravel pit with gravel operation, crusher plant, asphalt, and the whole works. So we testified at county commissioner hearings about the impact on species of conservation concern. And then along with other folks who weren't happy with the gravel pit, got the whole thing turned down. A year later, this landowner proposed a large subdivision over his entire property. So we met with that landowner and walked his property. And he appreciated that, and we talked about the importance of bird habitat and And one interesting thing was that he had been cutting down dead cottonwood because, of course, they were dead and useless. And we pointed out how birds use these dead cottonwoods to nest in and find food. And he had never appreciated that. So he quit cutting down dead cottonwoods, and a year later had put up a whole lot of birdhouses. But he turned his whole subdivision around so that he focused the subdivision on 60 acres and took 240 acres and pledged it to agriculture and wildlife. After we had reviewed subdivisions for some time and talked to the county land planners, they asked for us to review all subdivisions in the county because we provided an expertise about birds that they didn't have and they appreciated. So we now review all subdivisions in Missoula County. We've reviewed almost 50 by now. So we write letters and in some cases testify the impacts and make suggested modifications. Our keystone species is the Lewis's woodpecker, and its population has declined something like 60% in 30 years. It's doing very well along our IBA. We have some 50 to 60 nests that we've identified in our last survey in this IBA. It's about 25 miles long and 25,000 acres. There are cavity nesters such as the red-naped sapsucker, pileated woodpecker, Barrow's goldeneye, the hooded merganser. A couple other species of conservation concern are the Lashley bunting and the calliope hummingbird, which is a National Audubon Society watch list species. We use volunteers to do our bird surveys, and these are folks who are mostly members of Five Valleys Audubon that enjoy getting out and identifying birds, but more importantly, they enjoy using this hobby for something more creative and constructive toward accomplishing conservation. So we'll field anywhere from 4 to 12 people on a bird survey. We break up into teams and canvass the area completely. So it's a great experience for the birders as well as providing data that can be useful in other ways. One thing that's been interesting in telling our story, in the process of going to hearings, the developers are learning about the importance of these birds, and they also are gaining respect for what we are trying to accomplish. And in fact, several times developers have called us and talked to us about a proposal that they're going to submit, wanting to know our reaction to it before it ever gets to the planners themselves. And that's a sign of reaching the right kinds of people.